Hey, so this is part two. If you haven't seen part one, this one might not make as much sense. So go back and watch part one. I'll link that um, below. So we talked about this sort of set of ideas that I have been developing. And I want to make it clear, first of all, this is still very much like a rough draft and sort of a work in progress. And I'm sort of thinking through all of these ideas and trying to piece it all together, and it's a challenge. Um, and so let's start with a quote from Thoreau that kind of will set the tone. He said, "Why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed, and in such desperate enterprises? If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer." And the whole that quote really kind of summarizes what I'm trying to say here. I think that most of us, this is what happened for most of us. We went to school and we were told by our parents that we had to go to school and that we needed to excel in school and graduate from high school and go to college. We needed to pick up a trade or whatever and get a job, and then get a job so we can afford things, so we can have our own house, so we can have a car, we can have clothes, uh, furniture, go on trips, and have a life. And so we were told essentially that what we wanted to do was to utilize education as a means of putting ourselves in within a system that allows us to purchase things, buy things, afford things, and the real the the money was really in uh, those areas that required a lot of education and that required very specific skill sets. Um, and so most of us, that was sort of like the most of us who were successful in school. That's what drove us, is this notion that, "Well, I don't really want to do this work. I don't really understand why I'm doing algebra two. It doesn't. I have seen no relevance to it, to the information in my life. But I have to take algebra 2 in order to graduate from high school. And I want to graduate high school because I want to go to college. I want to go to college because I'm being told that if I go to college, I can get a better job, make more money. And if I have more money, I can buy more stuff that I want." But only on rare occasions did I ever even sort of question that whole thing. It was just kind of like that was what I was supposed to do. That was clearly the thing. There were times when I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to study algebra 2 or chemistry or whatever. There were a lot of subjects that I just didn't find interesting. But I just bit the bullet and did what I had to do to pass and get through those particular hoops so I could get to the next thing. Um, but what Thoreau's saying here is, why are we caught up in that? And I think one of the reasons why we get caught up in that is because we as we move through life, we see how our parents, our friends, and ourselves are situated in comparison to other people. So we make a lot of comparisons. So all growing up, I would compare, look at the clothes that I'm wearing and look at the clothes they're wearing. And you would see people who had nicer clothes, nicer things, um, maybe who had, like when I was 16, people who had a brand new, really nice car. And then you saw other people and you're like, they didn't have as nice a clothes as I had. And their parents were never going to get them a car. They were going to have to go out and get a job and get a car. If they were lucky, they could maybe afford one. And so we saw ourselves in that sort of continuum, that sort of spectrum. And that comparison, that part of our mind, this is a natural part of the ego, started comparing. Okay, I'm going to compare myself to other people, and then saying to myself, I want to sort of move up that ladder. I want to be able to afford nicer things because if I afford nicer things, people will kind of look up to me. If I have nicer things, I can do more stuff. I can go on more trips. I can have a nicer car. I can have a newer car. I can have really nice new clothes. I can have all the newest gadgets, all the newest electronics. I can afford all those things that I really want. And people will, um, there's a sense that if you've got a lot, that people look up to that. And also as a guy, to be perfectly honest and transparent about it, is as a guy, you feel like more. I'm going to be able to attract more companions, more female admiration if I can acquire these things. Because that was sort of like the mentality that if I'm wealthy, then I can then more women will be attracted to that. I realize how sexist that sounds now, but that was the mentality that I was working on when I was young, and I don't think that's completely uncommon even today. So, going back to the Thoreau quote, he says, "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer." But I was hearing that same drummer that most everybody else was. I was trying to keep pace and with my companion, and people who weren't on that sort of track and in that same type of mentality, you start to think of they're weird. Like, why aren't you trying to succeed in school? Why aren't you concerned about the same things that I am? And so this whole sort of philosophy that I'm outlining is the concept of hearing a different drummer for teachers, for students, and for our society at large, hearing a different drummer. And the problem is that there's multiple problems here. One is um, I'm still in the mousetrap. And so it is a trap when you think about it. Like, so I went through school and went through college and I wound up getting a job. And once I got that job, um, I got a home, I got a mortgage, I got a car, and there was a note on the car. And I had a credit card and I started buying things and maybe put some furniture for the house on like a 5-year plan to pay off. And once you get that and you've got a mortgage and a car note and other types of debt, then you're like, I've got to keep this job. Whether I like it or not, I've got to keep this job because it provides me benefits. It provides like if I have to go to the doctor, it helps me pay for that. If something catastrophic happens, it helps pay for that. And I've got to there are these monthly bills coming in that I've got to pay somehow. And if I don't have the money to pay those bills, I might lose them. Might They might come and take my furniture, or I lose my car, or I lose my home. I get evicted, um, or foreclosed upon. And so the trap gets you. You know, you go into school, you get the job, and then you buy stuff, and it closes. And then you're like, what do I do now? Now, fortunately, I generally liked my job. I love teaching, but there is this sense, though I generally liked my job, that you are still trapped. I mean, you may like the cage you're in, but you're still in a cage. And so, what did I do? I continued to just do my job and pay my bills, and sold a condo, got a nicer house, had kids. And then once you have the kids and I've got to feed them, I've got to make sure that they have the things they need. You get fully wrapped up in that trap. And I understand, like when I say trap, it has such a negative connotation. In a way, I intend it to be negative, but in another way, it's not like I don't want to make it like this one dimensional thing that is negative. Like there's wonderful things about my life. I mean, I love being a father, and I've enjoyed the homes that I've lived in. I've enjoyed the cars. I've enjoyed the cell phones and the computers and all the things that I've been able to own. So it's not like it's all bad, but it was never something that I really kind of questioned. It was never a paradigm that I actually critiqued or questioned. It was just something I did, and the momentum of it just kept carrying me forward. And then I think something happens as you get older, maybe, I don't know, let's say it's in your 40s, and you recognize this life doesn't last forever. Maybe it was in my 30s. Life doesn't last forever. There's going to be an endpoint to this. And is this cage or this trap, is this where I want to spend the rest of this time that I have left? And so you start questioning it and thinking about the whole process. And through different contemplative practices that I've engaged in, I've recognized sort of this thing that I've constructed. And I also recognize that I told my kids sort of the same message that no, you need to stay in school. You need to get your education so you can get a good job. And I'm essentially leading them and encouraging them to go into their own forms of traps. And I think most parents do this lovingly and out of a desire for their children to have good lives. But what I'm doing here, what I'm suggesting in the previous video and in this video, is for us to completely and radically rethink the whole thing. And the problem is, though, when you are within the trap and you don't really see a way out of it because I've got a few more years to retire, and you're like, I just can't escape now. I've got responsibilities as a dad. I've got responsibilities as an employee. I've got a few more years until I can get retirement benefits. I do have, I can't just, I could, but it would be unfair to the people around me for me to just completely unplug from all of that and deconstruct it all at once. And so the system that I'm suggesting, there's I I acknowledge the hypocrisy to a certain extent of me sharing this and advocating for a particular system that I myself have not yet adopted, that I myself have not yet invested in. But it's where I want to go, and it's where I think we should go. So this, so so with that said, what I would say is let's stop for a moment and pretend like the current paradigm didn't exist, that we were starting society from zero, that all of these things that neighborhoods and cities and industries and all these things didn't exist, schools didn't exist, nothing existed. It was just we're just a big group of people and we're deciding how are we going to organize and structure society. And the first question for me in that brainstorming session would be, what is the most important thing that we can experience as a human being within a lifespan of 70, 80, 90 years? Let's just say it's 80 years, we'll round it out. So what is the most important thing for a human being to experience? What are the things that we want to feel? What are the things that we want to do and experience? And that's going to be different for different people, but I would say that there are some universal things that we all want to experience. We want to be happy. We want to feel at peace. We want to love and be loved. We want to extend compassion and feel compassion for us. We want to cooperate. We want to have fun. We want to spend time with people that we enjoy. We want to see things and travel things and try new things and experience the whole sort of buffet of things that we can experience, smells and tastes and sights and sounds. And we want to have a good time. We want to enjoy as much of the moments that we have in a lifetime. We want to enjoy those moments. And so, if we were to take those goals and to structure society, would it look ultimately like it does now? And I don't see how it could. I don't see how it could possibly look the way we it looks now. And so I will go through what I think is a typical adult life in the United States. And I realize that for you it may be slightly different, but for the most part, this is kind of what it is. Monday through Friday, we get up in the morning, we go to a job. You may even enjoy your job, but you're sort of indebted to go to that job. You're there for 8 9 hours. You travel to work, you travel home from work, you get home from work, you try to unwind, eat some dinner, clean up from dinner, do some chores. Maybe take, if you have kids, take them to practices or games. Maybe you have some hobbies. Maybe you want to have an hour or two at the end of the evening, if you're lucky, to read, watch a movie or TV or whatever. And then you go to bed, and then you get up the next day and you do that. So 5 out of the 7 days, usually for the average person, 5 of the 7 days in a week, you're doing that, where you only in that given day have maybe an hour or two to really do the things that I was telling you beforehand, which is to really just relax and enjoy and have autonomy over your time. In other words, you have complete control to direct what it is that you want to do. If you want to rest, you can rest. If you want to read a book, you can read a book. If you want to chill out, if you want to drink a beer, you can do that. But you've only got about an hour or two of that 5 of the 7 days a week, which means that's about 71% of your time, of your life. Because 5 out of 7 is about 71%, I think. Somebody check the math. 71% of the time your your life is generally invested in doing stuff that you're not self-directing. Like I said, even if you like your job, you don't have most people don't have complete autonomy over what they do in a day. And this is why everybody, well, not everybody, but most people look so forward to Friday night, because I can finally set that 71% aside, and I can spend some of the money that I made and go out to a restaurant or movie, or just chill out and have some fun with my friends, stay up late. Saturday, I can sleep in a little bit, maybe do some chores, but I generally have some self directed time on Saturday, um, and maybe on Sunday. Maybe you go to church on Sunday, and maybe you have some chores to do. You got, lawns to mow and landscaping and gardening and dishes and laundry and other household chores and maintenance. If you own a house, you've got probably something that needs to be fixed or painted or whatever. But in general, from Friday at 5 or 6 o'clock till Monday morning, you've got some self-directed time, but that's only about 29% of the days you have to live. So then what we do is we say, okay, well, when I retire, when I get done with this, 30 to 40 years of working at this job, I can retire. And then I've got all kinds of self-directed time. The problem with that is that if you say you start work at 22, 23, by the time you retire, you may be in your late 50s, early to mid 60s. And at that point, if you've kept really good care of your body, there's all kinds of things you can do, but you still have a limited amount of time left to do them. Because at some point, your body's going to break down. At some point, you're not going to be able to take that hike. At some point, you're not going to be able to snorkel in that ocean. At some point, you're not going to be able to ski down that mountain. And for some people who unfortunately have health issues, by the time they retire, they already are their body's already in such a shape that the best that they can do is just sit around and watch, TV, you know, and try to relax and enjoy time on their porch or cook a few things, but they don't generally have the capacity to do many of the things that they wanted to do when they were younger. And then you die. So going back and thinking about what would we do if we could structure society if we started from zero? I don't think that's the system that we would build. So why did we build that system? We built that system, I believe, because it met the needs of capitalists. And I'm not trying to make out capitalists as evil. I know that there are a lot of people who do, and I know there are some capitalists who are evil, but it's a system that developed just like we had monarchies develop, we've had capitalism. Capitalism just sort of another form of that. It's a little bit, maybe a tiny bit more democratic than a monarchy, but there's still people that are in power who have the control and the influence, um, and who are able to, through our labor, live the kind of life that we wish we would kind of hope that we could live. Now, there are many capitalists who work their asses off. I get that. But there are also many, many wealthy people who are able to have that leisure time and do what they want to do. And if you are that wealthy, if you are choosing to work your ass off, you have the autonomy to choose that because at any time you could say, I'm going to hire somebody else to do the things that I'm doing, and 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 then take off and go sailing or whatever it is you want to do, see the world. So you're still self-directed, but for most of us, 71% of our days are not self-directed. But rather than questioning that, it's been around for so many generations that we just try to figure out the best way to survive and thrive within that system. So, someone named Candace asked me some questions, and I thought these were really good questions about my prior video. And one of my former students also commented and really touched my heart, a lot of the things he was saying, but someone named Candace as well. Um, um, she asked these questions, so I wanted to take a moment to answer these questions. But I wanted to, before I answer the question, sort of preface, kind of like just get some things out in the open, because this is an evolving philosophy that I don't think it's in its final form yet. Um, and these questions are really helpful in getting me closer to a final form. So she asked, what does the curriculum look like in a system where teachers are given more autonomy? So going back and thinking about those things that we want as a human being, what is it that is most valuable to experience as a human being? Love, compassion, peace, happiness, those types of things. The curriculum in my system is built around the flourishing of those things. Now, that doesn't mean that students don't learn basic reading skills, math skills, science, social studies, because those things are very important, I think, in living a full and rich life and understanding the world around you. Being able to read the thoughts of Thoreau, if I hadn't learned those basic reading skills, I wouldn't have been inspired by Thoreau. If I didn't learn basic science, I wouldn't understand about the natural world around me and really have a deeper appreciation for it. Social studies helps me understand what's happened historically, so I understand the context of how capitalism came into being and and how the United States kind of developed over time. So those things are really important. Um, but if the only things we're doing is trying to provide basic knowledge over those basic skills, I think we're missing out. So the curriculum would include, first of all, let me say this: the curriculum would be decided upon at the local level. And I recognize this is kind of controversial for some people, and another question gets at that in a minute. But I do not believe in one size fits all curriculum. I don't believe that there should be a federal one size fits all curriculum and all states, all districts, all schools adopt that one particular curriculum. I think now, if that's what the local if the federal if there is a federal effort like Common Core, which I opposed just philosophically. But if you like the Common Core standards and the Common Core curriculum, and your local community decides that that's what you want to adopt, you have the autonomy to adopt that. But if your local community decides that you want something different, you should have the freedom and flexibility to do that. And the reason why is Deborah Meyer, a really great thinker in education, said this: that the further the locus of control, the center of control, is away from the teacher in terms of defining what the standards are and what the curriculum is, um, the less autonomy that teacher is going to have. And I'm paraphrasing her, and I didn't get exactly right, but I want that as much power and control in the hands of teachers, parents, and students as possible. This is what a democracy looks like. A healthy democracy looks like the power concentrated in the hands of the people rather than concentrated in a federal program or department or even a state level department. There's a role for state departments and federal departments. There is a role for that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the curriculum and the standards should be based upon student needs at the local level, and the student should also have input. So what does the curriculum look like? It's going to look different from school to school, district to district. It's going to look different. And we're going to shift it from a top-down model to a bottom-up model. And the curriculum is going to look on like what that particular community decides is valuable and important for students to learn. And what I would advocate for is a strong emphasis on developing inner strength, inner capacity, and resilience to to live a happy life. Because no matter what you do, if you've got those skill sets inside to be equanimous, to be at peace, to be joyful, then whatever sort of job or career or focus you have in your life, you're going to be able to lead that happily. We know for a fact that being wealthy does not guarantee happiness, and we know for a fact that living without lots of material items, there are all kinds of people around the planet who live with very meager means and material goods that are very happy. Now, this doesn't mean that I wouldn't want to address poverty, but that's a whole separate conversation. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that the curriculum should not be about how do I maximize students making a living. It should be about making a life, and making a life goes back to those core experiences that I think we want to have as human beings. So that's what my curriculum would look like: is we can teach those basic skills within a context of how do we live a full, rich life, happy and at peace. And then we shape it around those core goals. We shape all the experiences around it, and we also get significant student input. What are you curious about? What do you want to know about? What is it that you hope to learn? And allow students to guide what it is that we're going to be learning in that classroom. And then I, as a teacher, have the capacity to say, you know what, they're curious about this. Let's say they're curious about a bug, curious about a plant. How does a plant grow? And we grow some plants, and then we talk them. And then when I link them up with resources, and we can do this at an individual basis and as a classroom, but we'll need to allow students to we have to that's the problem, is we don't trust students and we don't trust teachers to follow their natural curiosity. Because we don't do that, we don't allow students and teachers to sort of guide their own learning and take control of the reins of what it is that they're going to learn and at what pace they're going to learn it. What you do, and they don't intend to do this, but what you do, and I think Neil Postman says, we take students and they are question marks when they start school, and they are periods when they leave school. We drive out that curiosity because we tell them, no, 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 no. The things that you're interested in, that you want to know about, that's not what we're doing today. I have these standards in this pacing guide, and here's what we're doing today, whether you're interested in that or not. That is not educate. That's not what education should be. That is a that is a mode of education where you are an empty vessel and I'm pouring into you what I want to pour into you, whether you like it or not. And what it should be is I've got this empty vessel and I'm going to go around and put the things inside that I want to learn about. And I have a teacher to help guide me and help me find the resources to do that. And the teacher as a facilitator, not as a pourer of knowledge that some bureaucratic entity decided every student should know, and every student should know this much and in this time period. That is absolutely contrary to what we know about the human condition. Humans learn at different levels, at different paces. We have varying interests, but we all have a natural curiosity that can be developed or it can be snuffed out. And what I'm afraid of is that we snuff it out. Next question. There has to be some measurement of success for students and teachers, right? Perhaps you can get rid of standardized testing, but would one arbitrary set of goals just be replaced with another, even if it is less stringent? So let's talk about testing. Let's talk about measurements of success. My issue isn't so much with assessing students and measuring students. I think we have to do that. I think we should do that. My issue is how those assessment results, how those measurements are used after we take them. And I use this metaphor. So when you go to the doctor, let's say you go for a yearly checkup, your doctor is going to maybe measure you. Maybe they're going to look in your eyes and your ears and up your nose and down your throat. They're going to listen to your lungs as you breathe in both sides. They're going to take your temperature. They're going to take your blood pressure. They're going to listen to your heartbeat. And maybe through that process, through those measurements, there's a concern that comes up. And the doctor says, at this point, I'd like to do an MRI, or I'd like to do an X-ray or a CAT scan, or I'd like to test your blood for XYZ. And they do those measurements and those tests, and then they come back and the doctor says, I have a diagnosis of this particular condition, and here's some medicine I want you to take, or here's an operation or a procedure that I want you to go through. And then when we go through that and you start taking that medicine, or we go through that, we're going to run these tests again and just sort of see where we are. That's all smart for the doctor and the patient to do, to measure. What we wouldn't do is we would not judge the doctor based upon the results of the test. That would be so stupid. If the doctor said, I want you to go test your cholesterol, and it came back and it was high, you wouldn't say, well, the doctor's terrible because my cholesterol's high. That is what we do to teachers and schools. So we measure student progress, and then rather than examining specifically what the teachers and the schools are doing with the students, we have this sort of arbitrary level. And then if students are above that level, because it's completely arbitrary. When we did No Child Left Behind, they just kept moving that arbitrary. It's kind of like thinking of a high jumper. And let's say we had the bar at 5 feet, but next year it's going to be 5.5, and then next year it's going to be 6, to determine who is good at high jumping and who is unsatisfactory at high jumping. You keep moving that bar up, and what's going to happen over time? More and more people are going to be unsatisfactory, and then you're going to say, well, the school's not doing as good a job with the high jump. But you didn't but no context was given to explain that the bar was moving up a little bit each year to determine what was okay and what wasn't. So that's what's happened to schools through No Child Left Behind is these arbitrary measure this arbitrary bar of measurement of this is satisfactory and this is unsatisfactory kept moving up. So it made it look like schools were failing. It never takes into consideration the fact that maybe the kid has a bad knee. Maybe the kid's just not a great jumper, but he can do a shot put amazingly, but the only thing you're measuring is the high jump. And that's the problem. That's so the problem isn't so much doing the assessment. It's okay to see how high can you jump. The question is that the only thing we're going to measure? And B, are you going to use that measurement and say the the teacher or the school district or the state is not doing well because of the measurement, because the measurement's low? Even though the we know for a fact that socioeconomic conditions play a significant role in what those scores are going to be. And the teachers in the schools have virtually no control over the socioeconomic conditions. It is ludicrous, and it's what is well, people who are advocates call it test and punish. And this is what we do. We test students, and then we punish the teachers and the administrators and the districts and so forth. We punish them if they have low test scores. And this was done in the name of accountability because taxpayers are paying for teacher salaries and for school districts, and they want to have results, and they think that it can all be quantitative, and they think that it's like a football game, and that you can just it just comes down to numbers, and that's how you determine the quality of education. And the only easy way to do that, to give taxpayers an accountability system, the only easy way to do that is to have bubble in tests, because the other forms of assessment, more authentic forms of assessment, have much more subjectivity in them, a and take much more time. And so it's much easier just to say every student's going to take this bubble in test, and we're going to run that through, and then we'll give you a number to look at and determine whether it's better than last year. And then the public is led to believe that that number that measures a very narrow set of skills on that is a snapshot of one day or just a couple of days of testing and a bubble in test that the student sees. They don't see how that's relevant. You remember taking in this bubble and test. The only reason why you did it is because your teachers or your parents told you you had to. It wasn't something that you wanted to do, and it was boring. You'd read these long, stupid passages and have to answer what's the main idea of this thing, like about a lighthouse or some stupid shit like that. And you'd get through it because you didn't want, if you cared, you didn't want your teacher to be in trouble, and you were led to believe that it was a really important test. In my school, my high school, they tried to incentivize doing well on it. They would give you 10% on your final exam grade, 10 points on your final exam grade if you scored high enough on the particular standardized test. But there's nothing in life that you have to do where you're bubbling shit in. No human being sees that particular activity and says, I see how, doing these kinds of bubble and tests are going to help me in my career. Like there's no connection to reality. They're only done because it's an efficient way to gather some kind of data. And we gather that kind of data, and it makes us look like, oh, we know we've got numbers to share. And we can show exactly what's going on with your tax dollars. And here's the number. And if the number's low and you get a poor or whatever, needs improvement or whatever your stupid ass report card says, then the public just believes it because the public doesn't understand that context. The context is not given to them. They don't understand. They don't understand it. They just think public schools are failing because the newspaper is just printing the scores, and the scores are just being released. And If there is context, they're not reading through all the context, and really, most people aren't reading through the context. They're just reading through that final report card score, that final data that's given. And if it seems like it's low, they're going to think the schools are doing a bad job, and if it's high, they're going to think automatically think they're doing a good job. It just happens to be that the districts and the schools that are scoring high also happen to be in areas that have financial resources and socioeconomic conditions that lend themselves to having high test scores. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why the districts that have the financial resources are doing better than the ones that don't. And why would we punish teachers over this? So this is just stupid. And so what I believe in more authentic forms of assessment. I believe that students should produce work in groups and sometimes individually, and it should be real work that's connected to real life, that is relevant, and that those assessments should be as authentic as possible. And that they sometimes should be learning how that students should also be learning to do self-assessments. The students should be learning how to assess their own work. They can have a rubric. You can give a student a rubric or a guideline and say, hey, does it meet this criteria? Like, what do you think about your work? What do you like about your work? What did you get wrong? And what you're doing is you're teaching you're embedding into a student the capacity to identify their own weaknesses and their own strengths, and to figure out what it is they did wrong. Because if you just give students a test and it's on Scantron or whatever, and there's just a bunch of red checks next to it, they just look at the grade and 74, I didn't do so great. 99, I did fine. I jumped through that hoop. What's the next hoop? And those scores don't. It's not authentic. So my dad, when he was running a school, he didn't have grades. What he did was he sent home a list of competencies that the students had mastered over the last particular time frame. So let's say you have a 9-week report card, rather than sending home a list of the names of the classes and an A, B, or a 90, 70, or whatever, a numerical or letter grade, you send home, here are the objectives or standards or things that your child has mastered over this time period, which is a much more authentic form of assessment. So we don't need report cards. We don't need grades. We don't need standardized tests. You can do quick little measurements of students' reading and math skills if you need to, as a diagnostic tool to see where they are and where we need to go with instruction, to help guide the teacher and individualize that instruction to make sure that students are progressing. And when we see them slowing down and struggling with progress, then we can figure out what interventions we need to deploy to help that student get unstuck and continue moving forward. That would be a smart way to use assessment. And the teacher's not worried about it. The teachers see, this is the thing, it's a fundamental distrust of teachers, that they don't have the student's best interest at heart, or that they're being lazy and just going in and without the standardized test, they wouldn't care or have any type of incentive to teach. And that's kind of so much bullshit. We are done with standardized tests for this year because of the pandemic. And teachers are teaching their asses off right now with no worries about the standardized test. In fact, if anything, this is going to improve their instruction, because maybe they have more autonomy. Hopefully they have some more autonomy and they don't have to worry about teaching to the test. And if you want to recruit and retain great teachers, they don't want to teach to the test. They don't want to be merely people who prepare students for that bubble and test, because it's too narrow. And it forces you to push to the outside all the things that I talked about again at the beginning: happiness, well-being, experiences in nature, field trips, all that stuff and art and beauty, all that stuff tends to be pushed to the side as extras. We call art and music and PE, we call them extras or exploratories or whatever your school calls them. And that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I don't understand why an art class is any less or any more of an exploratory or an extra than math. What makes math more important than art? What makes history more important than music? And so when you say that the standardized test is how you're going to measure success, and the standardized test doesn't measure art, doesn't measure music, doesn't measure PE, then those things are seen as extras. They're not really that important because the test is about the math and the reading, and so all that stuff kind of gets de-emphasized. And I would suggest that it's an important part of human flourishing. So she says, perhaps you can get rid of standardized testing, but would one arbitrary set of goals just be replaced with another? Um, I don't know that it would be arbitrary, and it wouldn't be serving the needs of capitalists. It would be serving the needs of the students. So and the students would have input over what it is, what they're learning, and have ownership over that. And the teachers would have more autonomy. So I think it would be much less arbitrary. The next question is: a system more driven by teachers and student input would likely mean that schools would vary quite a bit from state to state, city to city, or even neighborhood to neighborhood. How do you ensure that the quality of schools and education is consistent? You can't. It isn't consistent now. I've traveled all over the state of South Carolina, and I'm not going to name districts, but I've been to districts where there are buildings that still have fallout shelter signs on them. And I've been to other buildings that look like you're inside one of the nicest malls you've ever been in, that have science tables that you can hit a remote control, and the science tables go up for lab work, and all the science tables go down for desk work. And there's a music studio inside, and there's other school districts with dilapidated buildings with air conditioning that doesn't work very well, older computers. So there's no consistency now. But your point is a valid one, because if we give local districts and schools and teachers and students more autonomy, there are going to be differences. And the question is that such a bad thing? Why is it when it comes to spaghetti sauces or Coca-Cola or Dorito flavors, we're all good with having different flavors and different styles, but when it comes to schools, they all have to be doing the same thing. Maybe it would be better for us to all do what feels like the right thing to do in our local communities, understanding that, because this is the big thing that I would have concerns about, is you want to make sure that you are protecting civil rights. Because one of the things that was terrible was that when we started to integrate schools, that there were some states that did not want to do that. And so it took the federal government to step in and say, all students we're going to integrate everywhere, and we're going to protect the civil rights of students anywhere. And that is a huge role that we have to play from the federal level, is guaranteeing civil rights. And the state also needs to be ensuring that as well. But the quality is going to already does differ from district to district. What I would suggest is that rather than forcing every school district to try to fit into a particular box, giving them much more freedom and autonomy to determine what that community feels is best for students. And that is going to look different, and the quality is going to look different. But I think the overall quality, even though the quality will still be different from place to place, the overall quality, all the ships will rise, because when you give students and teachers more autonomy and more flexibility, you're going to recruit and retain teachers better. Students are going to be much more invested and see much more relevance in what they're doing at school. And so I think that you would see much greater flourishing everywhere. And understand this, that we like even in the local community, you may have multiple schools, and that's okay. And I think if we really truly value democracy, that we have to put more power into the people's hands and take more power away from federal or higher level bureaucratic structures. I recognize that's a little bit, sometimes, folks on the left don't like that. Folks on the right don't like what I'm saying, and folks on the left sometimes don't like what I'm saying. Um, but I think as long as we're very careful about ensuring civil rights, that um, centralizing power over what happens in schools is not a good thing, because it damages democracy. Next question was, many students thrive in the current system's environment, and many students would loathe the aspects of your proposed system, focusing on nature and whatnot. How can the system be able to cater to different preferences and learning styles? That's a good question. Um, Many students thrive, many students don't thrive in our current systems environment. I mean, look at the rates of anxiety, depression, suicide. Look at the dropout rate. Look at the rate of students who wind up in prison. Many students aren't thriving in our current system. And the question is, what is it to thrive? And this goes back to the foundational uh, discussion that we need to have, which is, what is human thriving? When you say thrive, does that mean that they are, like my son, is thriving in our current system? Unquestionably. Straight A. I mean, he's taking calculus in his freshman year. He's at a scholars academy, thriving. That is thriving, and he is more than likely going to get some really good scholarships to go to college, and he's going to wind up, I hope, he's going to have a really good job and all that, but that he enjoys. That is a form of thriving for sure. But is that the only thing when we say thrive? Is that the only thing we're looking at? Going back and talking about happiness, peace, joy, well being, physical and mental wellness, that's thriving as well. And I would say that our students are not thriving, and those things are more essential than taking calculus. So, but I take your point, and the point is that we should have different types of schools, because she says, can this be accomplished by having different types of schools available based on a student's interests or career goals? Absolutely. Absolutely. Not necessarily. It's the fundamental thing is, let's figure out what is it that we want to experience as human beings, and then how do we structure schools to bring about those experiences and those feelings, and then understanding that every human being is going to be different and going to want different things, and helping them find those different things through having multiple schools. Which is why, if you go back and watch my video, I said we don't need to have schools with 4,000 high school students. That's ridiculous. Schools should be more like 200, 300 students, and then you can have academies um, within a community, different academies based upon different interests. And maybe even you have days when those academies kind of cross each other, like, because you don't want to just pigeonhole a student into one, like say someone's really into the arts. You don't want them just to experience the arts. You want them to have a full, rich experience. And so there's maybe some flexible ways that we can structure schools that allow students to have choice, but also to have some freedom to move around within those choices, and also to be exposed to things that maybe they don't think they're interested in, but if they were exposed to it, they would be. So yes, I would say lots of different types of schools, and lots of smaller schools, lots of hybrid concepts of giving students some virtual work and giving some students time in nature and giving students um, time in community with other students and educators. Then she asks, is slowing down going to mean that students need to go to school longer to learn everything, or is the list of things the kids need to learn going to be shortened? So in the last video, I talked about the importance of slowing down. What I'm saying is that the pace of our world is not in alignment with our human brain. And as a result of that, we're seeing all kinds of mental health disorders. And what I'm saying is that I'm asking, why are we going so fast? Why is everything so urgent? Why are we in such a hurry to get students to a particular level? So does it mean that students are going to go to school longer? Maybe. I wouldn't have them go longer in a day or in a year. But maybe I don't. What we've got to do is stop looking at education as like, okay, the only time you're getting education is when you go to this particular building and are with these particular people. And we also need to say that not every, like, because what we do is we tell students that this is, in order to graduate, these are the classes, these are the classes you have to take, and then you have a little bit of choice in there. We've got to stop making it so rigid like that. And we got to stop the idea of grade levels too. So first, second, third, all the way through, we got to stop those concepts of grade levels as well, and allow students to explore and trust that they are going to arrive where they need to be and where they want to be. Because if you take out this whole thing of, I've got to get ready to plug myself into this capitalist system, and you say, the education is going to be about my own edification, it's going to be about developing myself as a human and being really deeply connected to my species essence, as Marx would say, really, really developing myself and being self-actualized. If you get there, then you're going to figure out what it is you love and value and what brings you richness and meaning to your life, and you're going to explore those topics naturally. And then you can set up courses and set up things for people who want to go that particular route, and then they go through those experiences and have a guide who is an expert in that particular field or area that helps them sort of progress through that and develop. But that's not really how we do it now, because we don't trust students to do that. We don't trust human beings to maintain curiosity and to develop the way we want them to. So we funnel them through a system that was built for an industrial age, and most of them wind up with jobs that they don't enjoy. Most people wind up just doing a job because they get paid well or they get paid enough to maintain the trap that they're in. And so what I'm kind of saying is that this is about more than just restructuring schools. Because as long as you have the capitalist system kind of as a sort of the template upon which the schools are built, as long as the capitalist system that we have continues, that's going to be like the kind of the function of schools is going to be to serve. It becomes subservient to that sort of overarching economic system. And what I'm suggesting is that we reevaluate that whole capitalist system. And like I said in my last video, I know that makes me make me communist, but why do we have to give it a label? Let's just talk about, how can we live in collectives? How can we live in cooperative communities where we share resources, where we live in harmony and peace with nature and with each other, and we teach the next generation the fundamental things they need to know to be happy, healthy, and at peace, and to live in harmony with each other and the planet. And yep, I realized there are some very serious consequences for that. The home that I live in, I probably would not live in a collective like that. My cell phone, I probably wouldn't have like the really cool new cell phone that I've got. I probably wouldn't have this podcasting system. I probably wouldn't have the laptop that I'm making this video on. There's a lot of things that I probably would not have. But what would I have? What would I lose? I'd lose a lot of material stuff. Unquestionably, I wouldn't have as many TVs, wouldn't have a nice refrigerator with double doors and ice maker, maybe. I wouldn't have my air fryer and maybe my Keurig. And there's a lot of material things that I might lose. But what we lose is one thing to consider. What will we gain? What would we gain if we lived at peace in nature simply? Simply. If we live simply, just to meet our needs and the needs of the other people in our cooperative community, if we live to just meet those needs, what would happen is, yes, I would lose the nice Tacoma truck that I've got, the TVs, the dishwasher, but here's what I would gain. And let's go back to the beginning of this video. That 71% of the time would get lower and lower and lower. And that 29% of the time would get higher. And the 80 years that I have to live on this planet, the majority of it would be self-directed. The majority of that time I would get to spend with my kids, with my wife, with my friends, with my family, out in nature. I wouldn't have to wait until retirement to go take that hike, to go adventuring. I could read that book. I could have that conversation. We could sit around a fire and talk to each other and have these rich conversations. I'll go to bed a little later, get up a little later, enjoy my life, and direct it the way I want to direct it. And I think that would be a worthy exchange. I would gladly give up all the stuff that I really don't need to have the stuff that I do need. There's a price to pay either way. And the question is, what do you want to pay for and what do you want to receive? And for me, now that I'm sort of on the tail end of my career, I recognize that if I could just restructure it all, that the system I just described is what I would have built for myself and for my kids. And that's what I hope to eventually get to. It's just really hard when you're 3 years away from retirement and when you've got a mortgage and cars and responsibilities. It's really hard to extricate yourself from that particular situation. And so, so my challenge to you is I recognize that we're not going to be, if I want to do it and I can't feel like, I don't know that I can find the pathway there. Not immediately anyway. But my challenge is for us to, first of all, recognize the system that we're in, why we educate the way we educate. And then maybe what we need to do is build a bridge to get to where we know we should be, where we want to be, and take the steps to get there. But it starts with a very radical revisioning and reimagining of what education can and should be. And if we do that, if we We first of all have the vision and see this is where we want to go to. And let's say we're at the top of the mountain and we look down and we see that place that where we want to start that village, that lake. We have to bring other people to that top of that mountain and show them this is where we want to go. Because as long as they're on the side of the mountain, they're not going to have that vision. They're not going to see what we're seeing in terms of where we want to go. So we've got to bring people to the top of the mountain, help them see that place where we want to go, and then we get enough people to start the journey there. But it starts with that vision. We have to have a shared vision. And as long as what you're trying to do is stay on that side of that mountain and just continue to build upon and improve that community on the side of the mountain, you're never going to get to the lake. You're never going to get to that place, that promised land. So we have to decide, what is the purpose of life? What, why do you, what do you want to get out of living? You get this one shot to be a conscious entity experiencing the world. And what do you want it to be filled with? Do you want it to be filled with 71% of your days an alarm clock going off and you going, okay, okay, and going to work, coming home tired, and not being able to direct and control your life or have any kind of autonomy for 5 of the 7 days, and then to get to your retirement and realize that the bulk of your life is now over. Your youth is over. And you spent it trying to fit into a capitalist system that you never built and that you only benefit from by getting scraps. Then you have children and you basically are just trying to get them to help them get more scraps than you did. We say this all the time, and I'm guilty party number one. It's not material stuff that's going to make you happy. It's not stuff that makes us happy. Those are wise words, but do our actions resemble those words? Do our actions match up with the wisdom in those words? Do our schools match up with that? And so we're going to have to one day hopefully wake up, share a vision, and then have the courage to take the journey and make that vision a reality. Bye.